Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Mary Meehan. I'm from Meehan Associates, and I'm joined today by my colleague Mark Nodder, who I'm sure needs no introduction. Today we want to share the work undertaken to explore an advanced manufacturing supercluster for Northern Ireland. Just to say that this session is being recorded and will be shared widely following this, so you'll each receive a link to the recording. There's also a Q&A function, and we would welcome any feedback or comments before the end of the session, and Mark and myself will try our best to answer any of those questions, or simply if you want to leave some feedback, that's great as well. I'll be sharing my email at the end of the session, so you can forward on any more detailed feedback to that as well. So before we look at the proposed model, before we go into any detail, we just want to be clear about the starting point and where this has all began. So since last September, Mark and I have been working very closely with the three networks, almost on a daily basis, with the network managers and with other facilitators as well, and with the companies. So we see the great work that's happening at a local level. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with the three networks and see the great work that they're doing. So this work that we're going to outline is not about creating another layer around industry, but it's more about examining whether those networks and those strong networks, relationships and capabilities that are already in place can be connected more effectively for the benefit of manufacturers right across Northern Ireland. So we're really very fortunate. We're starting here from a really good position of strength. We have already established manufacturing networks and those trusted relationships in place, and we have very strong capability across industry. So when we were deciding on the title for this webinar, the subtitle that we used was that three strong networks behind one coordinated industry-led platform supporting advanced manufacturing in Northern Ireland. So I'm just going to begin by reflecting on why this opportunity is very timely and how the CAP process could provide a route from feasibility to a delivery. So CAP, in case, for those that aren't familiar with CAP, it's the Cluster Acceleration Programme. So it's funded through Invest Northern Ireland, and there are a number of networks that are currently being funded through the CAP programme. So a sincere thank you to Invest Northern Ireland for funding this very insightful project. So we're currently, if you look at the slide here, we're currently at stage 3. We've worked through the feasibility stage. We've tested the opportunity. We've tested the evidence of need and the appetite for collaboration. We've also defined the cluster proposition. We've defined the model in a lot more detail, and Mark is going to take you through in detail what that model looks like, what that governance looks like, and what those programme priorities are in the second part of the webinar. Over the next few weeks, we will be finalising our findings. The work that we have done so far, we'll be completing that and working with the leadership teams of the three networks to validate our findings and to get those approvals before any investment decision is made. Subject to all of that, completion of all of that, and given that the networks are happy that we move to the next phase, then an application will be submitted to Invest NI's CAP programme for up to £1 million over a maximum of 5 years to establish and operate the supercluster model. As Mark will outline in his section of the presentation, that core funding of £1 million or up to £1 million will be intended more to fund the management and coordination capacity of that supercluster, of the proposed supercluster, and to be able to leverage additional funding, to unlock and leverage additional funding, wider programme funding. And we have identified a number of flagship projects, which we can go through in more detail as well. Okay, so with that in mind, today's webinar will focus on the evidence, the proposed response, and the choices that still need to be shaped. So there's 4 things that we would like you to take from today's webinar. First is why the work started and why we believe better connection across the existing manufacturing ecosystem matters. Secondly, what manufacturers and what industry has told us, what the networks have told us and what stakeholders have told us about buyers they are facing, and more importantly, about the opportunities they see. Third, what is now being proposed. We want to share with you what we are proposing through all of those findings, what that emerging proposition looks like, what that programme portfolio looks like, and what that model looks like. And finally, your input does matter. We're still in this process. We haven't finalised models yet. We want to hear from you. We want to know what success would look like for you, and maybe how you can participate more fully in this. So we're not here to present a finished concept, but we want to move from that feasibility towards that final proposition, and have your help to shape that. Okay, so the 3 established networks. So there are already 3 established networks. So as I mentioned, we are starting from a position of strength. There's already 3 very strong established regional networks operating. And these are 3. There are many other networks, I should add as well. But this, for the purpose of this study, this is a starting point. The 3 networks, as you can see, the geographical boundaries of the networks, their ambition for those to grow. So if I just go through in detail for those who aren't familiar with those networks, we have GEMEX in the Northwest. They've been operating from 2022, and they've been connecting industry and education, doing a great job. They've worked very closely with academia around talent and skills and improving competitiveness for their companies. Mega in Mid-Ulster, they've operated since 2019. They've developed a very strong industry-led model, and it's very much about focusing on that attraction of talent and retaining that manufacturing talent as well. And we also then have MTF, which has just recently rebranded. And you see Donna, who's the network manager on the call here today. MTF, as that's abbreviated, it's been operating in Mid and East Antrim since 2018. And it's very strong in bringing industry and partners together around skills, productivity, and clean tech. They've delivered great programs around that whole clean tech and net zero and sustainability space. So you can see that each network already has its own identity. They have very strong relationships and local priorities, and those are certainly assets to retain. So we are not proposing that we would replace any of these networks. We would be proposing a network of networks, not a replacement body. We are proposing a more coordinated approach to working with the 3 networks. If you like, we're looking at a more strategic coordination layer that will allow those 3 networks to work closer together, retain their delivery close to their companies in their own respective regions, but while collaborating on a more Northern Ireland-wide basis, and using that scale and that critical mass to deliver on larger and wider opportunities, both at a local, national and international level. Okay, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Um, so, um, Apologies, I jumped ahead there. So, looking at the economic footprint of these areas, the case for acting at scale becomes much, much clearer. So, these are some of the economic um, levels that we've looked at, and these are taken at a council level as well. So, I just need to qualify that as the measures. But you can see that the three networks collectively represent a substantial part of Northern Ireland's manufacturing economy. Together, over the three networks, they account for these three council areas, they account for approximately 29,700 manufacturing jobs. And you'll often hear Stephen Kelly in Manufacturing NI citing the figure of 100,000 jobs for Northern Ireland and manufacturing jobs for Northern Ireland. So there's almost a third of those jobs being represented across the three, and representing around 2.4 billion in manufacturing GVA as well, which is also just over a third. So as you can see, the detail across the three is different, but the message here really is about, the fact that this isn't a these aren't small networks, but they sit within a very significant manufacturing base and already provide a credible platform for engagement. Okay. And apologies, I'm trying to move slides on as well. So I just want to talk you through the process in terms of our methodology and how this feasibility process translated that existing strength within the networks and how the consultation evidence has led us to the proposition that we're presenting today. So as you will see here, there's 5 stages that we've undertaken. It's been very much a listening process. We've thoroughly enjoyed going out and listening to industry through various different methods, through surveys. We've had regional workshops. We've had many one-to-one consultations and engagements with manufacturers, with other networks outside of the 3 networks, and wider stakeholders. So we've been mapping all of that support landscape. We've identified, I suppose, some of the areas of overlap, and explored also international best practice as well. So we've been very fortunate where we were able to visit the Basque Country back in September 2025. A group of us which was led by Invest Northern Ireland visited a number of different clusters and vocational training centres in the Basque Country over 5 days. We also had the opportunity recently to visit Scotland and have a closer look at their manufacturing ecosystem as well. From there, we've been working very closely with the networks to ensure good alignment. Each network has been delivering at a local level programs which they have built a lot of capability in and capacity. So there's lots of strengths that complement each network. So we want to build on that and to scale that across the 3 networks. And so it's building on the strengths that currently exist around a shared set of priorities and common goals. So from there, we moved into the design phase where we were able then to develop the flagship programs, and we're now just finalising the validation phase of that. We've been testing this, we've been identifying key stakeholders and partners. Okay, so I just wanted to explain that. So this hasn't been developed. So just to let you know, this hasn't been developed in isolation, but it's been very much grounded in evidence throughout. So that co-design process has involved lots of stakeholders, but keeping industry very much at the centre of that. So these are a number of different stakeholders that have shaped the proposition. As you can see, we have covered from right through from manufacturers from every size through to the industry networks, some of the industry bodies, innovation and skills, working closely, very much closely with AMIC, universities, training providers and the colleges, consulting closely with policy and investment stakeholders, and then the international partners. And again, we will reflect that. So this is just a very busy diagram of that process, of that engagement process. And as you can see, that has been a very broad journey over bringing together manufacturers, industry associations, research partners, and government bodies. But as we've went through this, the proposition has changed as a result, so that it's been a very iterative process. It has changed. We have constantly updated our findings, reflecting the priorities and needs around industry and stakeholders. So there has been a very strong mandate for collaboration and shared solutions. But there's been a very consistent theme across all our consultations in that the supercluster should be industry-led, should be practical, should be accountable, and should have measurable results. So it's very much a delivery body that will operate and without being an additional layer. Okay. So across that consultation, there's been a number of emerging themes that have presented. I have to say that there's no shortage of capability in Northern Ireland. There's no shortage of funding opportunities. But what the consultation did point to was an opportunity to connect the already strong provision, existing capability and funding provision more effectively across the networks and different organisations. So just going quickly through each of these areas. Firstly, companies would see a great benefit in expanding their supply chain connections across the three networks, helping manufacturers find more capable partners, strengthen their resilience in their supply chain. And we do hear a lot now around the importance of local supply chains and building resilience into those supply chains, particularly when we are exposed to all of those international external factors. But it's about pursuing those larger opportunities together. Secondly, the peer benchmarking. There is a real strong appetite for more structured benchmarking. The networks are already successfully doing a lot of site visits and factory tours themselves, but expanding that across the three networks and facilitating those visits across three networks and across Northern Ireland as a whole. And learning from each other, having that practical learning between those manufacturers is really, really valued by the manufacturing community. This will be no surprise that skills is one of those top priorities, given labour market conditions and the low availability of labour. Companies do need have a clear demand for more upskilling, reskilling. Apprenticeships are the backbone of manufacturers. Many of the leaders in manufacturing have worked their way through the apprenticeship route, so there's a huge value placed on those as routes to into the workforce, and also that leadership development piece. And we have a lot more detail on each of these areas, and Mark will explain some of the flagship programs that we have matched to these areas. We also believe that the supercluster could provide an honest solutions brokerage, guiding companies to the best expertise, technology, or existing support rather than duplicating that provision. And again, that is going back to companies and our manufacturers learning from each other in terms of maybe some of the AI tools that they're using, some of the digital tools that they have adopted in their own operations that can give that confidence to the other companies as well. So that peer-to-peer learning piece is very important. So the supercluster would act as a connector, connecting companies up to chat to each other or signposting them to provision. The lean and productivity, no doubt, is one of the key drivers in terms of, or for our manufacturers. There's lots of very good lean and productivity programs out there, which can be leveraged, which can be also scaled up. The digital and AI and sustainability areas as well can be turned into implementation projects through the supercluster with measurable outcomes. And also finally, on the international connections piece, we believe that the supercluster could be very well placed to connect manufacturers up to other international clusters, partners, and really explore more collaborative opportunities. So facilitating that exchange of information, facilitating those connections on an international scale. There's quite a large number of clusters, both at a European and international level, that we have looked at, and we see the opportunity for partnership arrangements with them. Okay, so going through all of this process and okay, what is this response going to look like? What is the proposed response? So we would recommend that we have an industry-led platform that connects these opportunities at a Northern Ireland scale. Okay, so again, just to reiterate that we're not going to merge the three. We're not recommending that there's going to be a merger of the three networks, that this is an additional added value for existing networks. And it really does begin with industry demand. That programs that we have proposed that have been identified are co-designed. There's a real need for them. Companies are prepared to engage, drawing on the skills and the competencies of the existing networks and looking at the most appropriate delivery partners. Nothing has been approved. These are just recommendations. But all of the programs within the proposed structure would have to demonstrate very much measurable impacts, whether that's through productivity uplifts, through more upskilling and reskilling, through more technology adoption, better sustainability. The list could go on, exports, job creation, etc. But this is the key central value of the proposed supercluster. So it's creating a scale to build those stronger connections and funding propositions. Okay. So I am going to hand over to Mark, who's going to go through the governance piece and the flagship programs and some of those success measures as well, Mark.
Sure, thanks, Mary.
And you're just move the slides on.
That's grand. Good morning, everybody. And I'd like to be able to say it's great to see you all. So it's kind of an act of faith, hoping that everybody is there. But it's much appreciated because this is a really important program which Mary has led, the feasibility into building on the existing manufacturing networks and actually looking at the possibility of a supercluster. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes now about what that supercluster might look like in practice in terms of what it could potentially deliver, how it will be structured, organized, and how we'll measure its success through the impacts it has at firm level and at an economy level. Okay, so just to give you a flavor of some of the things that could come from a supercluster. So in the work that we did on the feasibility study, we asked the three networks to look at where they might be able to contribute and take the lead in terms of programs that could then be made available for the benefit of companies across the whole region. And it really builds on the feedback that we got in the in the early consultation of where there are gaps, where there are needs, where companies are frustrated that for whatever reason they're not getting the help that they need. So these are seven potential programs which have been developed by the three networks. I think the important thing is to underscore the fact that these are industry led. These are designed by industry to meet industry's needs. Now, of course, they will need to be delivered with expert partners. Those partners they could come from Invest and I, they could come from AMIC, Ulster University, the colleges. They could come from places where in the past we haven't tapped into expert resource. So we could be bringing in external expert providers. But the kind of things that you can see here that would be areas for focus, lean manufacturing apprenticeships, for instance, coupled with a learning factory, looking at skills gaps, micro skills in particular, peer-to-peer learning on lean principles, continuous improvement to increase productivity and competitiveness, embracing industrial intelligence and looking at the application of AI, taking a sustainable view for advanced manufacturing, and then building on the international linkages that we've already started to create in the Basque Country, Norway, Denmark, Canada, Scotland, and so forth. So we're really looking at programs which could have wide benefit for the manufacturing community. We're not looking to reproduce what's already there. We're actually answering the calls and the needs of industry and designing something that is specific to address those needs locally. So we talked there a little bit about drawing on those international linkages and the international best practice that we can actually build on through the supercluster. And I think if we look at the next slide there, Mary, we can just illustrate, even from the work that we've done in the relatively short space of time that we've been doing the feasibility study, the willingness of international partners to assist and to share what they've got in terms of their experience and their knowledge with what we're trying to do. So these are just some of the relationships that have already been established through the process, and those which we can build on as we move forward. So, example, Mary talked about the study tour to the Basque Country, which was hugely successful, and in the Basque Country, they've been at the cluster game now for, well, literally decades. And these aren't short journeys, but they've an awful lot that they've achieved and they're willing to share to help others. So there's a really strong relationship there that we can build on. We're looking at best practice examples in Norway and in Denmark. We've already got a strong relationship in Canada through their next gen supercluster in advanced manufacturing. Good people who are very willing to share what they've learned and enable us to actually hit the ground running. Likewise, much closer in Scotland, their advanced manufacturing ecosystem is arguably a little bit more established and experienced than our own. And again, we can learn from that. And they're very, very willing to share what they've learned and their best practice. And we're building links in the Republic as well, of course. ATIM is the first and strongest of those, but again, that willingness to cooperate and collaborate is very, very clear, and that's really going to help us in terms of getting some momentum potentially on the supercluster. So, in terms of the way we would propose structuring the supercluster, we've really tried to reflect the feedback that we were getting from each of the three networks. Mega, MTF, GEMX, as Mary was saying earlier, all doing a fantastic job several years into each of their key programs. And frankly, the last thing they want to do is to lose their local identity and their local autonomy. So the supercluster would not be replacing these networks. It would really be bringing all of the networks and potentially others together under an overall umbrella that would actually coordinate the advanced manufacturing ecosystem. But we're really keen, and we heard this very, very loudly from the people with whom we consulted, that industry retains the lead. And so again, this is a proposal. It will be there for consideration. It's not actually set in concrete at this point, but we're really looking at a structure whereby we bring in the founding members from the existing networks, and of course we can add other representatives and other networks over time. Um, we go for governance through an 11-member initially voting board with an industry chair, and probably that chair will be drawn from each of the three existing networks on an annual basis, at least for the first few years. There'll be an executive delivery team, and then we'll have working groups looking at individual subjects and projects. We'll ensure that we have representation from specialists such as the universities, potentially the colleges. We will have Invest, the Department of the Economy, potentially as non-voting observers. But the key thing is on all major decisions, there will be that 63, 64% industry voting majority. So the board itself, as I said, will have representation from each of the existing networks. And in the future, who knows? There are other clusters starting to emerge in the area of advanced manufacturing, around supply chain, around digital technologies, around lean, of course. And we will consult with those. We'll see how their ambitions develop, and at some point, I'm sure that the initial supercluster will actually broaden to embrace others. So there will be MTF, Mega, and GEMX certainly at ground zero, along with representatives from the wider manufacturing perspective, specialist directors from the universities, from the research and innovation centres, and then the government through Invest NI. So that would be the initial structure we're proposing. In terms of what this all might deliver, and there's a lot of numbers on the page here, and I'd have to say these, in our opinion, are modest. Everything tells us when we talk to clusters and superclusters in other countries that once the project gains momentum, then there will be significantly greater potential. But in the 5-year initial look at the growth of a supercluster, we're suggesting that these are the kind of numbers that we can engage. So up to 250 manufacturing companies, up to 140 looking at implementation pathways, and you can see some of the other headlines as well in terms of peer-to-peer learning, continuous improvement, the numbers of apprentices that we'd like to bring into programs, upskilling and reskilling, how many use cases around digital and artificial intelligence, and then how many, you can see the number of sustainability plans and projects. So we think this is relatively modest. We've kind of field tested this through consultation with the three networks, but I think once we start to get a bit of momentum, then there's no reason why these can't accelerate and reach even stronger numbers than we've indicated on this little chart. So all of that, of course, will have an impact, both at a local regional level and potentially at a national regional level. Again, we think these are relatively modest ambitions at this stage, and we'd need to do a fair bit more work to try and really hone them and get something a little bit more concrete. But we think that the kind of programs that we're proposing and the general nature of collaboration and companies working together is likely to give a fairly significant uplift in productivity locally, up to 15% we've estimated. We think that it can contribute 15 to 30 million incremental exports and 300 to 600 additional jobs. We've got a number of kind of working assumptions behind all of this. There is a little bit of science. But again, I think that once the supercluster gets up and running, develops a bit of momentum, then the potential impact both locally and regionally could be significant. We've also looked at how the initial investment, if you like, in the supercluster could yield greater returns. So if we were successful in securing up to £1 million over 5 years through the Invest Now program as our core funding, we believe that we can leverage a further 2.6 million for program delivery and for really building the supercluster. And that can come from external funding. We've looked at contributions externally. We've looked at revenues that we can raise through our programs, and we've looked at sponsorship and so forth. And we feel that there's there's a really strong case for being able to leverage this kind of number. So an investment of 1 million actually unlocks a 3.6 million pound pipeline, which is really significant. The million over 5 years really is just paying for the core team who we would propose actually gets a supercluster organized, up and running, business development, people looking at funding, people looking at external sponsorship, people overseeing those flagship programs. We've again tried to take a fairly lean view in terms of those costs. The last thing we want to do is create some kind of overhead that is really just a cost burden. So talking to people that have been through this journey before, there is a kind of a minimum investment in terms of the core capacity. But again, the evidence shows that once momentum starts to be generated, then it becomes much easier to attract that external funding, and hopefully success builds on success. Okay. So, Mary has taken you through the steps really that were involved in the feasibility study, and I have to say, Mary has done most of the work. I'm very much in the supporting cast here, and I've talked you through a little bit of how we propose the supercluster could be governed and organized, what it could deliver, and what kind of impact that might have. If we take a step right back, and the feasibility study has been conducted over a period of months, and we've spoken to an awful lot of people in different scenarios. I would say, okay, there are always skeptics who quite rightly, will ask pointed questions about what's this all about, what's it going to do, what will be different to what we've had before. But I would say there's an overwhelming desire to actually take the next step. I think that the three networks themselves have shown brilliantly that what can happen when you bring companies together with a common goal, common themes. They've shown that there's real power in collaboration, in industry working together, and having a single voice and starting to work on a single plan and developing an ecosystem that benefits everybody. So they've got, if you like, that local success. And what we're trying to do now is just take that success to the next level. The kinds of things that people have said along the way, and some of them would have been skeptics, who are now saying, well, actually, the biggest opportunity here is going to be in the scaling. That success will come from collaborating and not competing, because they've learned that, and that the impact of all of this could be transformational. So I think we should all be very, very encouraged by the feedback we've had. We look at the international examples and best practice, and we know that it can be done. I think we look at ourselves, and we also recognize that we can't afford to operate in isolation. We're not a big place, but actually, when we combine our resources and we actually have a common goal, we know again from history really that we can have significant impact, and we can really punch above our weight. So that really brings us to a point where, as Mary said, we're going to be drawing the strands of this feasibility study together. And over the next month or so, we'll start to produce our final report and start to look forward to what might be the next step in terms of what is to come for the potential of a supercluster.
Okay. Thanks for that, Mark. for taking us through the governance and the flagship priorities, and bringing the whole concept really to life there. And hopefully, through Mark's presentation and my own presentation, you've a better feel now for how this supercluster will work in practice. It's very much about delivery on the ground for industry. As you see that we've come through a co-design process here, and we're very pleased with the results that we've gathered and the insights, and it's been a really great journey. So we've documented over 60 consultations, one-to-one consultations. We have documented on evidence, and everything we have delivered here is very much evidence-based. So thank you very much. I do welcome we do welcome feedback here, or any comments that you think could help improve it further, or if you've any are there any particular I suppose concerns that you might have, or other opportunities that perhaps we've missed. We really do want to hear from you. So my email address is there, so feel free to reach out, email, or if you want me to have a call with you or Mark, that's no problem as well. We're hoping to complete within the next month, so there's still time to help shape this. Um, Kieran, I'm just going to ask you now to stop recording, if that's okay. Um, I'm